Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members, officers, and members of the public listening online. Welcome to the meeting of the Police and Crime Panel. This meeting is being broadcast live to the public via YouTube and will be available for viewing on YouTube after the meeting. Please turn your microphone on when speaking and turn it off when you have finished. A fire alarm test is not scheduled today, so if the alarm does sound, please exit the room and the Democratic Services officers on my left will direct you towards the fire exit. I have received apologies today. I beg your pardon. Yes, good checking. Yep. So we have received apologies from Councillor Woody Wiss for today. So we'll move straight on to the agenda. Agenda item 1 is minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of October 2025, pages 3 to 8 in your pack. I can't see anything that has come to light for myself. Does everybody agree that minutes are an accurate record? Thank you, members. Agenda item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of October 2025, pages 9 to 18. Same applies. I couldn't see anything that jumped out to me. All members happy? Thank you. That's unanimous enough. Agenda item 3 is public question time. I received no questions from the public. Agenda item 4 is urgent items. I have received no urgent items. And agenda item 5, members, is declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Are there any items or declarations you wish to declare? None. Thank you very much, members. Agenda item 6. The first report on the agenda today is the Finance and Medium-Term Financial Plan. Update is on pages 19 to 26. So I hand over to Mr. Matthews as Police Crime Commissioner. Mr. Matthews, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I've brought this report to you. Obviously, we'll be dealing with the budget in a future meeting. I'll draw your attention, if I may, to a number of paragraphs. So paragraph 10, where it says there has been no clarity on precept funding. I think that pretty much sums up the situation as it is at the moment. We've had no clarity from the government about pretty much anything as yet, which I suppose is par for the course. But I think after last week's budget and various announcements and discussions since then, the public are being hit with some tax rises. So I think those of us in local government will have to think very carefully about our finances going forward into next year, and if we want to add any further burdens to the local public on top of those that they have already had from the national government. So the uncertainty really isn't helping us. I will draw your attention also, if I may, to paragraph 13D, where it makes it clear that despite government promises that have been made to me, they have not funded in full some of the bills that they have settled upon us. In 27D, if I can just jump through to it again, cost of the pay award has not been included here. There was a shortfall last year between what the government told us to budget for and then what they actually delivered, which of course then threw things slightly out. So whether that will happen again in the coming year or not, we don't know, but it is a risk that we have to consider about. In paragraph 23, we're talking about this MTFP, which has been formulated using the best available information, but I would like to stress that is just the best available information. There's a huge amount of uncertainty going around about this. And that is why, if you look at paragraph 33, I've asked both the Chief Constable and the Chief Executive of the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner to work on a budget this year, sort of effectively starting at zero and working up and justifying the money that they wish to spend, because I know we will all be under financial pressure. The public will be under financial pressure, and I think it is incumbent on the Chief Constable and the Chief Executive to think very carefully about the money that they are spending. So this is, if you like, a snapshot in time as things stand at the moment. I have not even tried to get out a crystal ball to look into the future, but insofar as this is the best we can do, I've brought it along, and of course the Chief Financial Officer is sitting to my right for if there are any detailed questions about anything in the report that members would like to ask. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. So what I would also add for anybody who's listening online and members of the public and maybe for the record is the Commissioner and myself agreed and panel that we would write to the Minister and express our concerns at the continued low funding for LLR police. You've all had copies of the Minister's response. I personally didn't spot anything in there that was encouraging, that said it was going to be looked at and addressed. So I think I guess backing up the Commissioner's position is we just need to sit and wait what comes down the pipeline in due course. But you know, I've lost track of how many times this panel has written to the Minister through successive commissioners asking for more money and raising the issue of our low funding, and we've never managed to achieve anything, which is disappointing. So I'll open up questions. I'm going to set the ball rolling, if I may, Mr. Matthews, and Kira, you may wish to comment. So the question really for me is about those efficiency savings that are recorded and the pressure on the budget for next year. So a little bit of understanding insights to how those savings have been delivered this financial year. Are they circumstantial, as in under-resourced by staff? Or is there specific areas or number of areas where those efficiency savings have been secured? And then for the next financial year, where the evidence suggests we'll be under financial pressure again, what areas you may be looking at to secure those savings? So hand over to you, Ms. Matthews, or Kira, take.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I will hand over to Kira, but before I do so, perhaps it was remiss of me not to put on record my thanks to this panel for having written to the Minister. And also, if I may elaborate on what you were saying, it wasn't just a letter saying, give us more money. I thought it did set out very clearly the reasons why Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland for crime prevention, victim support, policing and all sorts of other things, we're getting a bit of a raw deal compared to some other parts of the country. So I just wanted to put on record my thanks, and also that it wasn't just a plea for more money, it was a fully justified explanation as to why we were being poorly done. Anyway, I'll hand over to Kira. Thank you.
So I don't know if you've cast your mind back to February. There's quite a list of possible areas of efficiency savings that the Force and the OPC have put together to try and close that deficit. The Force and the OPC have done really well to kind of close that gap and to realise a lot of them savings that they had identified. There was two areas where they've not been able to meet that. One was around police staff savings. There was £1.4 million within the budget that they've managed to reduce to create efficiencies of £1 million, just because of the reorganisation and trying not to kind of break kind of the organisation and trying to make sure that the organisation is still be able to deliver on its functions. The other area is around with some income that was expecting for secondment of officers into our regional collaborations. Again, there was not required as part of the review of the regional collaborations target operating model. We wasn't able to. Some of the officers were sent back to Force. So again, that kind of created a £0.4 million underachievement of income that we would normally get for them officers being seconded into them regional collaborations. However, we have had some kind of additional income come in through our grants, which we hadn't factored in because we was unaware. We knew we're getting things like neighbourhood policing grant and hotspot policing grant, but again, we weren't sure of the exact amounts of them. So we have had some additional income come in. Some of that has been offset, and some of that has been we've been able to kind of redeploy staff into different areas to be able to meet the targets within them grants. The other one is around savings on debt charges. So we've been able to meet that through, again, additional saving of £500,000, just from things like there has been a bit of a slippage in our capital programme where we've not been able to deliver some of our capital programme within the timeframes, and that's created obviously a delay in having to borrow. We've also been able to look at our kind of borrowing internally as well and try and use our own resources rather than going out to borrowing, which is a lot more expensive. And then a couple of non-pay savings. So we have managed to close the deficit for this financial year. Going forward, obviously, there's a kind of we're in that budget process at the moment. So we are starting to look at areas of where there are potentially savings, what areas that we've already created efficiencies will be coming through for future years, which ones are one-off savings, and then again, how do we close that deficit? This report obviously shows the deficit, but a lot's changed since then. So we are expecting a much bigger deficit than originally stated in here, just because of things like factoring in the pay award costs as well going forward. Also movement in things like inflation, increases in kind of charges as well. So we're trying to factor all that in. It's very early days at the moment. We're only early in that budget setting process, but as soon as we get more information, we'll feed that back into the February meeting where we'll be bringing the preset proposal along with the budget requirement as well. But we at the Force and the OPC are really kind of trying to look at areas where we can reduce costs, not just for the short term, but for the medium and long term as well.
Okay, thank you, Kira. Very useful information. I think what I would just say before I open it up to members is the Vice Chair himself and Damien sat in on the National Association of Police, Crime and Fine Commissioners. It's quite a long. And within there, it was picked up that the government's offered putting forward or in 200 million pounds to 13,000 extra neighbourhood policing officers. Just for panels and members of the public's reference, that averages out about £15,500, which I don't think funds the police officer. So we will see. It sounds like a big number, but it's perhaps not as generous as it might seem. So I think for the office, the pressures will continue. So members, your questions, please. Liz.
Sorry, thank you very much, Chair. So I noticed that there's an increase of 10% in the ICT costs. So are you taking any measures to mitigate future inflation risks for your computer and software?
So when we do the when we look at the medium-term financial plan and our future costs, we do although if we say it's 2% inflation, that's not just blanket across all of our contracts. We do look at all of our contracts. Some are on different kind of CPI and things like that. So we do look at all of our contracts individually, looking at what the inflation rates might be and trying to factor them in separately. So it's not just, we don't just put a blanket 2% across all of our costs. If it's known within the contract, we will include the inflation. Also, when I look at things like ICT charges as well, some of them are national charges. So these are things like our police national database and things like that. So these are all national charges that we have no kind of input into. We don't have a say on how much that cost is going to be. We try and forecast how much that's going to be as best as we can with the best information that we have. We've tried to use kind of forecasting about on previous rate increases, but it's been quite up and down, so it's very difficult to identify. We try and factor that in, but usually we don't always get some of these information in until in late January, so it's always difficult to be able to build into the budget, and we try as best as we can to do that, but some of these we have no say in, unfortunately.
Thank you, Kira. Any other questions? Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, you mentioned the capital funding and borrowing. Of course, it's capital is permission to borrow, and of course, when you borrow money, you've got to pay it back with the interest. How do you use the Public Works Loan Board to do that? Because that's usually what councils use at a very fair rate of interest.
We tend to use, the PWLB. Yes, we do. So we try and look for the best rate we possibly can. We don't always just lend in. And also we look at kind of which are the safest and the most risk adverse areas to invest as well, so that we're not obviously risking, especially and we get the best rate we possibly can. So not just with borrow, but in our investment as well, we kind of look across the board at which ways we can get the best rates available to us.
Chairman, I think it's for a matter of record, and that's important. Chairman, you mentioned the members of the public listening and everything else. And I think it's important that they are aware of the fact that we're sitting here today talking exactly the same things that we were talking about last year and the year before that and the year before that. Your predecessor equally from the chair wrote a letter to the then government and their minister to say what you're doing about the funding. I've got both letters. And equally, the first one suggested that we had a good settlement on 1 year, but it didn't pan out with regards to when it came to £500,000 pension shortfall in the pay award. It's consistent from year on year. That's exactly happened. That's the reason the increase in the council tax in your precept, simply because those things haven't been met. So it's not just now it's happening. I think it's a matter of record that it's been happening for several years, and most of the cost is now being passed on through your precept to the local residents of this county. I think it's important to remember that. Now, equally, we need to remember that through the precept, we are paying for over 180 police officers through the council tax, and that's all evidence and it's on record. So we're paying for those officers, which we never got. Let's make it clear. We never got them. And there's still shortfall now in the police force. I think it's important to remember that. It's a concurring thing. It's not just happening just now. I think it's important to remember that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. And I think actually it's a very important point that you raised that, and I'm going to look to Kira to correct me if I'm wrong, but we've had a succession now of underfunded pay awards, underfunded employers' national insurance, and underfunded pension contributions. Yeah. So you're right, Mr. Lloyd, it's not a great picture. And, you know, politics aside, it is beholden on government to ensure that we're funded correctly, which is why we've just written yet again, setting out the needs, and TCC Sandal sent a very comprehensive letter to me, which you were aware of, with very, very detailed explanations where those shortfalls were and what the pressures were. And here we sit, as Mr. Lloyd quite rightly says, again, but let's see where we get to in February. So any other questions for the office on the finance update? Councillor Dave.
Thanks, Chair. Completely agree with Councillor Lloyd. It's like consecutive governments, and would you say that the pressures are a cumulative impact of the pressures over the years? So it's not just currently, but we're challenging. And secondly, in terms of the neighbourhood policing uplift, we have 23, 21, so 43 or so frontline officers coming in, but there's also said 12 staff there. I'm just wondering what those 12 staff represent. You know, it's very welcoming that we've got 23 and 21 PCOs coming to the front line. But, you know, I know we could do with more, but what would the 12 staff represent?
Matthews, who's taking it? Kira?
I couldn't tell you what. Some of them will be to backfill. So if, for instance, we move officers and PCSOs into frontline, so into the neighbourhood policing, then we would be able to use that to backfill. So, for instance, for PCSO, if they've moved into the neighbourhood policing as part of the grant, we are able to backfill them with a police staff equivalent role. So, for instance, I couldn't tell you an example of where we'd move someone from, but we have got the option to do that, to move them into that kind of. So we've taken them out of an area where it's not neighbourhood policing. It might be kind of our crime and intel department. One of the PCSOs might be there. We may move them into the neighbourhood policing and then backfill with kind of a staff equivalent role.
So I'm not clear. So the 12 staff would be non-policing staff that you're talking about. Yeah, it's just really.
Yeah, so the way that the terms of the grant are written, you are permitted to use the grant to employ staff if by putting staff into that role, you are releasing a police officer or a PCSO who is currently doing that role out into neighbourhood policing.
Thank you. Mr. Lloyd, just if I may, I don't know whether you want to come back on Mr. Lloyd's query about the extra police that we are paying for through the precept but actually haven't been delivered. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Okay, well, we've been through this one several times since I got here, Chair, and I think Councillor Lloyd and I will have to agree to disagree on this. I have tried to explain on several occasions and I always try to be tactful about exactly how I phrase this, that the figures that were so often quoted in the press about these additional officers were framed in a way to make it look as if they were coming, sorry, I mustn't prejudge someone's intentions. They were phrased in a way that some people may have misinterpreted to mean they were being funded out of council tax, when in fact they were going to be coming largely from reserves. And I took the decision I did not want to use reserves to be spent propping up revenue expenditure. It was there to do more long-term investments. And I therefore took the decision that would be the incorrect thing to do. But I think Councillor Lloyd and I will just have to disagree on this. We've discussed it several times. We have opposing views on the matter.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Matthews. I remember that conversation well about funding staff through reserves. I remember. Any other questions for the Mr. Lloyd?
It's right to reply. The evidence is quite clear. It's all in writing. It's all in papers like this. I've got a money, and the council tax went up 1 year, £24, £12 to offset the £500,000 pension shortfall, £12 to pay for these officers. It's all there in black and white. You can't argue with it. Whatever how you try and counter it, it's in writing. It went to a panel and it was voted on the panel. And you can't change that. Can't. And equally, could I just ask a question on paragraph 12 on page 21? For me, it's an assumption, and I applaud the fact that you've got to do some work to try and identify where or how it's going to pan out in the future. But there's an assumption there that the precept will increase by £14 year on year. That's something that you were aiming for anyway, regardless.
No, I think it's easy to answer that one. So at the moment, I have a completely open mind about what may happen with the precept. We're currently out consulting the public on their views. And of course, we don't know the parameters that the government will give us. It is the government that sets a range that we are allowed to increase a precept by. And within that range, we then have to make a decision based on public consultation, based on what the government has done in regards to the various grants that they send to us. We've already heard about the neighbourhood policing grant, for instance. So no, that's not what I'm intending to do. I have a completely open mind on what we might do with the precept. I think the £14 that's put there is what we think the government might allow us to do, which is completely different from what we will end up doing. But Kira wants to come in.
So £14 was what the precept was for 25-26. When we got the comprehensive spending review, there was it was modelled on that £14 as well. So what we do when we kind of look at the MTFP and we start modelling, we go on what the best case scenario is. So if, for instance, they do say that it's at £14, we look at what the most maximum available funding is, and we usually use that to model with. Again, like we say, we kind of assume that it may be £14 based on what it was for 25-26. So we've modelled on that because, again, it's best guess, it's finger in the air kind of, and then what would be the maximum available funding. But obviously that decision will still come down to the meeting in February.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Thank you, Kira. And I think collectively as elected members, we are all probably aware of successive government's position on if you do not take the maximum precept opportunity, don't ask for more, is the general principle that they adopt. Right. So any further questions for Mr. Matthews and his team? Okay, everybody happy to note the report? Perfect. Thank you, members. So we'll move on to agenda item 7, the police and crime delivery update, Q2. Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I know everyone around this table is aware of this, but for those who are watching who may not be aware, I'll just do a little bit of a preamble to it, if I may. The police and crime plan is a document which is written by myself and my team once every 4 years. So we're assuming this will be the last one that takes place. This particular police and crime plan, which came into effect and started being implemented in the spring of this year, was based on the manifesto on which I stood as a candidate to be police and crime plan, and was endorsed by the public by the fact they elected me. It was then turned into the police and crime plan, which came to this panel, which you all accepted, for which my thanks. And so this document is reporting back to this panel on how it's being implemented, the challenges we're coming against, where it's working well, where we need to do a little bit more work, and so on. So that's the purpose of this report, and just to give a little bit of background. I will draw your attention, if I may, to paragraph 5, at which point I must thank my chief executive and my entire team, who put a lot of work into implementing the plan and monitoring the plan. And of course, I must thank the Chief Constable and the temporary Chief Constable and his staff as well for all the work that they do on this plan, because obviously if we weren't all pulling together and pulling in the same direction, and the same goes, of course, for community safety partnerships I know so many people around this table are involved with. If we weren't all pulling in the same direction, we really wouldn't be getting anywhere. And while it's unfair to pick out people particularly, I must draw your attention to paragraph 37 and following paragraphs, where we're talking about the Violence Reduction Network and the excellent work that they do. I don't think really they get the opportunity to blow their own trumpet here as often as they should, because they are doing excellent work and are a real pillar of support. And going back to the previous report about the finances, the Violence Reduction Network is entirely dependent on a grant coming from central government, and we have had absolutely no indication from central government whether or not that will continue. Obviously, I hope it does. I think they do excellent work, but I just wanted to draw your attention to that. So overall, we are on course to deliver the plan on track. So all our little way markers we've put in about what we hope to achieve by this month, what we hope to achieve by that month, we're hitting them all, I think. I'm looking at the chief executive to nod at me. Yes, good. So this gives the detail of what we're doing and where we're heading towards, and so on. And I look forward to any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. I would focus myself on bullet 12, which is the matter we raised last month about staff satisfaction going in the wrong direction. Your Director of Performance may wish to make a statement. Yeah. About certain information that we queried last meeting. But I just, because your assurance was that you were talking to the Chief Constable about those metrics that we couldn't see, but I'm guessing, do you want the Director of Performance to comment first before you comment then, Mr. Matthews? Is that okay?
So thank you, Chair. So as the panel can see, that we have a performance framework that underpins the whole police and crime plan, and through that we've got a series of headline metrics that we track on a quarterly basis, and also sub metrics that we kind of don't present into the public domain. So the full dashboard of our headline metrics is attached in Appendix 1, and we've included additional columns at this panel's request to show the direction of trend. For the RAG rating, we've got a standardised methodology we use internally around the colour coding. So it's outlined in paragraph 8, but it roughly is around, if we're monitoring a percentage, we're looking for plus or minus 2 percentage points. That's what that will trigger a red rating. And for a volume, we're looking for a plus or minus 5% shift in that as well. That would be our red. So each of those red items, as kind of Chair has already outlined, is expanded on in paragraphs 11 through 19. Just highlighting the abstractions data, which is row, can't find it, 25 in the appendix. So the panel one note, we have changed the metrics slightly, although it's really tiny in the printed pack I've got. So it was number of hours above abstractions. That has now been updated to the proportion of available hours that have been extracted from the front line. So the rationale for that was because there was some queries around what the data was. That was one of the reasons why it was redacted from the report. But also that is very much the force's data, and whilst we hold the force to account for that privately, because of some of those queries around what the data was presenting, we wanted to make sure we were presenting the right thing to the public. So that metric has now changed, and that is what the force also internally hold themselves to account for. The previous metric included officers' annual leave, sickness, and also abstractions. So the upward trajectory we're seeing in the kind of appendix would normally be high, with July being a high leave month with some holidays, etc. And we also had the Safer Town Centres initiative running at that time, so our abstractions would be higher. So I think with that context that we see internally, that's kind of the additional context we get. I think it's also worth noting that for those two redacted figures, the Commissioner, we had our Corporate Governance Board last week, where again another request went to the Chief Constable around considering releasing that data publicly.
Is the answer still no at the moment? Mr. Matthews?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, well, my thanks to Lizzie, of course. So yes, I have raised the point you talked about, the staff satisfaction with the Chief Constable. He is aware that there is an issue, so he is taking this seriously. It's not something he's just seeking to brush under the carpet. And I think they are doing a staff survey that is also going to hopefully raise some issues that might be addressed. In relation to the extractions, I'd like to make 2 points, if I may. First of all, as Lizzie has said, it does include various other issues as well, such as sickness and so on. It's sort of why someone doesn't turn up for work that morning as opposed to extraction, which tends to mean they've been deliberately moved away from their day job to go and deal with an emergency. But I have been contacted by a couple of parish councils who have been feeling particularly aggrieved at the fact that their local officers have been extracted more than they think is desirable, if I can phrase it like that. And I have passed that on to the Chief Constable as well. And again, they're looking to see if those officers have been moved more than is normal, and if so, is there a reason for doing it. So we are taking this seriously. The temporary Chief Constable is taking it seriously. But at the same time, we can't really help it if people are ill, I suppose. But we are keeping an eye on it, and if, like I say, if anything sort of moves out of the normal bands of variation, we'll be taking it up. But the Chief Constable is aware, and he is taking steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Any questions for the panel? Mr. Lloyd?
Thank you. It's about the satisfaction rate. I think it should be a matter of record that from the ground floor, if you like, from the local police on the ground. And this is disappointing for them because they do an excellent job under the circumstances for which they find themselves. But the principle of this report being redacted, which is highlighted here, conjures up some worrying information that if they can do that with this, are they doing it with anything else? And here on this panel and elsewhere for too long, I think, years ago, you usually find that recorded crime was down by over 40%. And that was blurted all over the papers and saying how good it was. Only to find, in actual fact, recorded crime wasn't down, it just wasn't reported. And it was called cuffing, is the terminology that was used, which in actual fact, when you put it all back in, you did find that crime has actually risen. I hope looking at this, it conjures up that sort of information to me, thinking, hang on, we're not falling backwards, are we? And that is recorded crime or the crime that's reported to us here. I wouldn't like to think that we're falling backwards into a situation where recorded crime is down, but the reason it's down, it's not being recorded, and it's called cuffing. And I don't want to think that we're going back to that sort of situation, because you guarantee that that's not happening. So that we can get the confidence in what we see here, that we can believe it, and nothing's been redacted in a way that might give us some false information.
Mr. Matthews?
Well, I'll ask Lizzie to comment on any detail there. Obviously, I can't comment on what happened before I was elected. I think it is fair to agree not all crime is reported. and the percentage of crime that is reported can vary from one year to another, and in terms of crime type as well. So I'll just flag up one example where I'm going to have to confess to everybody here I have failed dismally. Is I've been told many times by many different people that the process for reporting a business crime is torturous and complex and very time consuming. And that puts businesses off from reporting business crime. Unfortunately, the process and the procedure which a business owner has to go through to report a business crime is set by the national government. Myself and my chief executive have tried diligently to try and find out who actually makes that decision. And we have been unable to find out who in government is responsible for making a decision on that process. So much as I would love to make the process for reporting business crime smoother and easier and quicker, I can't. I can't do it, and I can't find out who can do it. So I have to report great failure there. But I think that makes the point that business crime almost certainly is underreported because so many people just get fed up with the process and don't bother, and the same will apply to some other things. I can assure you, we don't redact stuff before it comes here. Some of the data belongs to the police force, and we're not allowed to publicise it because it's not our data. I think I'm also right in saying, but Lizzie will correct me if I'm wrong, that the police do not redact what they show us, if that makes sense. So we see it all and we work on it all, and we hold the chief constable to account accordingly. But unfortunately, because a lot of it's not our data, we can't actually put it into the public domain, which would be the case if we put it on an agenda coming to this panel. And of course, GDPR, our old friend, raises its ugly head at all this sort of stuff. But I'll pass over to Lizzie if she wants to make any detailed comment.
Lizzie, just before you do, so I think Mr. Matthews, picking on Mr. Lloyd, and you did your own comments about reporting and non-reporting. I've raised it before. I'm still intrigued to know what the website reporting abandonment rate is, because we've never had that data. We see it for 999, we see it for 111, but we do not see abandonment rate for trying to report crimes on the web, which is torturous as well, I can assure you. Lizzie.
Thank you. So just a few points that I'll touch on then. So just following on from what the Commissioner just said, we are one of the few OPCCs that does have full access to police force data. So across the country, we have a limited number of OPCCs that have got data processing agreements in place where myself, the analysts in our office can access what the force are seeing. So we are pretty confident in the fact that that what we see and what we use to hold the force to account is what the force are using to kind of use their demand modelling and resource allocation, etc. So we're pretty confident that what they see is what we see. There's not a reduction between us and the force. Like the Commissioner just said, because that data process agreement, we are held to account more in terms of what we do share, because it's not our data, it's the force's data. And with us being a separate organisation, we can't then just publish what we do see and what we don't see. So and because we are one of few, and it's very hard to get those data process agreements, and luckily we've got the force, we've got a good relationship with the force that allow us to do that. If they ask us not to publish something and redact it, then we will do that, because we don't want to risk us doing that, because it would make our job of holding the force to account much harder to do so. So that's the first point I'll just touch on. Secondly, around the data that's in the performance framework, some of them, as you said, are crime record statistics. So there is kind of, I remember what you were talking about then. I was around then when we had the whole 20,000 recorded crimes not being recorded. So to provide a level of assurance around that, the HMIC FOS do independent crime data integrity inspections of the force. So they check how many crimes should have been recorded and do a percentage of how many have been recorded by the force. And we've consistently scored since back in 2018, which I think was when we got kind of hauled over the coals. We have scored consistently high in that respect. So in terms of what comes into the police, there is a level of independent assurance that what is recorded should be recorded. Some of the data points within this, though, however, differ. So some of them are, we've got that independent assurance on. So the crime statistics in here, we'll have that assurance around the crime data integrity assessments. Obviously, we don't know what we don't know, what's not reported to us. Some of the internal statistics then are more kind of not controversial, that's the wrong word, but they so if I just pick out a few examples. So the average length for a PCSO, that's a matter of fact. We can get that from HR record. We know that we can monitor that accurately. Things around the staff survey, the officer hours saved, the number of NAPL officers, they are internal statistics that are used to model demand, but they're more subjective in their usage of them, and the context is really crucial in these ones. So that's kind of what I'd say. Some of them we can't have that assurance, but that is what the force are using. So this is what the force have got.
Thank you, Lizzie. Any other questions for us? Ellie?
Thank you, Chair. I'm still relatively new to this panel, and so excuse me if the questions that I ask aren't for this panel. Maybe you could at least assure me the questions are asked and answered so that I know that they are covered. So point 40, it talks about the VRN has a new prevention and diversion manager who will have specific focus on working with the education sector. This replaces the lead for children and families. Obviously, the need to work with families still remains. And it was just really to seek assurance that VRN still has some sort of exposure and access to work with families, despite that change in job title. The second one, again, it's about what information we can have or can't have as a commission. It's 44, and I've asked about it before. A key deliverable was to review the existing scrutiny arrangements, and there were some recommended improvements. I just wondered, are those recommended improvements public at all? Are they something that we can be aware of? I mean, I just find it very difficult sometimes to get a real sense or a flavour of what, you know, we're talking about the abstractions and stuff, but you know, so sometimes a little bit more information, but I don't know what we could ask for as a panel, whether that goes somewhere else for scrutiny. And then finally, 48, just in terms of the backlog in the criminal justice system, I just wondered whether any member of the panel had any initial reactions or responses to the shocking news last week, actually, about David Lammy proposals to slash the backlog and slash jury by trial. And I just wondered, as a police crime commissioner, as an office, how are you consulted on this, and you know, what implications would you potentially see for the local police force? Thank you.
Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Lamley is a disgrace, personally. The proposals to restrict jury trials so severely are absolutely appalling. If there is a backlog in the courts, which clearly there is, some of that is still a hangover from the lockdowns we had during the COVID years, but there are other reasons as well, then the answer is to clear that backlog. Longer term, and I know this is something that I've been, what's the phrase, banging on about since I first got elected. The long-term answer is crime prevention, because if there are fewer crimes, then there are fewer people being arrested, fewer people being charged, fewer people going through the system. So I think long-term we need to be putting more effort, more resource and more expertise into crime prevention and trying to sort things out that way in the longer term. But in the short term, I think it is David Lammy's idea of restricting jury trial is absolutely the wrong answer. I think it's very dangerous. It's absolutely appalling. And I've written him a letter which in hindsight, I think I may have dashed off when I was in a bad temper, but nevertheless, it did get across the strength of my feeling on this subject. I'll hand over to Lizzie for any of the detail that came earlier. Thank you.
Lizzie, just before you do it, I think Mr. Matthews and Ellie, you raised really important points here. I understood that trial by jury was a fundamental right within the United Kingdom. End of. Yeah. So
I mean, you've
got magistrates here. So
yeah, you're right, Chair. It is something which has been under attack for some decades. I think the Leveson inquiry was suggesting it should be replaced by a judge sitting with 2 magistrates in a large number of cases. I think that's wrong as well. And I just, because you all know, I'm a historian, many people say, oh, this is in Magna Carta. It dates back a lot longer than that. The reason why it's in Magna Carta is that King John was trying to get rid of it back in 1214. And by that point, the concept of trial by your peers was already about 400 years old in this country. I cannot express my anger and revulsion at what is being suggested. But anyway, I've taken that up with Mr. Lammy directly. I'm sure others will be seeking to lobby and make a fuss about this as well. But there are a number of other detailed questions as well, if I could hand over. Lizzie.
Thank you. So I'll take the ethics panel question, and I think I'll pass it to Claire to do the VRM one. So definitely we can share that report in terms of the recommendations that came out of it. So that was one of the key deliverables from the police and crime plan that we actioned over Q2. So over the last 6 months, our assurance officer in the office has been doing a review of all of our independent scrutiny functions. So that's our ethics and transparency panel, our joint audit and risks panel, and then all of the subboards that come under that, as I think is outlined in the next report as well. So so that she's been reviewing that. That's included stakeholder kind of conversations with force members, other OPCCs, and also independent one-to-ones with different members of those panels to find out what their recommendations are as to how we can strengthen that independent scrutiny as well. We had an away day last week, so we obviously wanted to go through the findings with them first before releasing it, but we're more than happy to release that. It actually paints us in a really positive light that we've got a kind of really broad agenda as to what we hold the force to account on independently with the scrutiny panel. So we're actually really happy to release it because it puts us in a great light. So but yeah, we can share that, and obviously we can go through some of them in the next paper as well in terms of those specific recommendations.
Sound good, Ellie? Okay, thank you, Liz.
And then you asked a question about the VRN and the change of job title in the VRN, and I would just say the change of job title, should it be no way an inference that the work that was taking place now isn't. It's just a change in structure. So although they now have a prevention and diversion manager, they also have a number of team members that work on youth projects and still with projects across families. And of course, all of the governance of the VRN, the delivery plan that they deliver on an annual basis, is brought to and signed off by the Strategic Partnership Board, which obviously has representatives from all of the counties, city and districts.
Ellie?
Thank you for the answer. Yeah, I think point 40 it says working with the education sector. It doesn't expand on that, but that's reassuring. And thank you, Lizzie, as well. I just wondered, Claire, whether you had any reflections on the criminal justice system stuff that has been announced and how it might impact the force.
I think the criminal justice system in general and how it will impact the force, we are still expecting prisons to be very full. And we know that there's definitely going to be impact on how the force and the wider criminal justice partners are required to manage those offenders that are released over time. I'm working with Deputy Chief Constable Michaela Kerr on our local criminal justice board at the moment, and we hope to have a strategy for those partners working together ready for release early in the new year, so that we're all working on the areas that individual partners need to concentrate on.
Any further questions for the panel? Okay, so thank you. What I would say, just in case there's a minister from the Home Office listening, please keep our VRN funded. It has achieved immeasurable things in its life, and it would be, in my personal view, folly to see that not continue and continue with the good work that it does. So, right, thank you, everybody. So we'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the annual scrutiny report of the Ethics and Transparency panel, pages 39 to 62 in your agenda pack. Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think this is really quite a straightforward report, which I hope has made sense to the panel members as they were reading it. I would like to thank everybody who's been involved in the various scrutiny panels and the work that they do. I think it's really important that the public have access to these reports, and indeed some of the meetings take place in public. It is absolutely essential for public trust and confidence, both in the police force and indeed in the work that my office does, that these panels are there and undertake scrutiny work on behalf of the public. They're not doing it for their own benefit, they're doing it for the benefit of the public. And it's really important the public know and understand that this work is taking place, and that if there are any anomalies, shall we say, or practices that could be improved, they're going to pick up on it and make recommendations accordingly. I'll just, if I may, again, pick up a couple of things. So paragraph 10 makes the point that the various members, we've made a real effort, get people in from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different interests, different special characteristics and so on, but also from different geographies as well. I think it is important to recognise that the police force currently covers Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, and it is important that people from all three of those communities can feel the assurance that they are being represented, as well as any special characteristics or interest groups that are being dealt with. On paragraph 21, I will pick up that there are several areas requiring improvement, and I think this isn't a bad thing. I think it is a good thing that these have been identified. It's a good thing they've been highlighted, and so that action can be taken. Indeed, recommendations, as it says here, have been submitted and implementation is already underway. And then, of course, there is the attached annual report, which goes into a good deal of detail about what's going on and the findings and so forth. So really, I think my main role here is to thank everybody who's been involved in this work on behalf of the public, and to emphasise the importance of the work that they are doing in building and maintaining trust and confidence in what can otherwise be a very complex system. And members of the public may have justifiable concerns, but they do know that there is a team of people working hard to hold to account and to make sure that it's all working. Over to you, Chair.
Over to the panel. Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Christine?
Thank you. I would like to start by supporting you and saying the report that's in Appendix 1 I thought was very thorough, very clear, and I'd like to thank the panel chair and any members that contributed to that. I think there are three things that particularly worried me. Page 50, paragraph 14, it mentions there were issues with attendance at the hate crime panel in July. I believe there is somewhere else I read that the OPCC was looking at how the structure what could happen going forward, and I'd welcome your comments on that. The out of court resolution panel only met once because of a lack of attendance from external partners, which I think is very worrying, that our external partners are not putting the same level of effort into attending. And given that there were concerns raised in that one panel, I think your point about the public wanting to have some assurance, I think the lack of attendance isn't offering that assurance, and I'd like to know what we can do about that. And I'll just finish off quickly. The hate crime panel, as you rightly point out, picked up one case of repeated misgendering in an interview. Whilst that issue had been picked up by the force and the officer had been provided with feedback, the panel in general has raised concerns about cases involving LGBTQ plus victims. And I think this, for me, is a very serious issue. 1 in 3 LGBTQ plus individuals will suffer abuse from a family member. If they have plucked up the courage to come to the police, the last thing they want is a similar level of abuse from the person who should be offering them care. Now, it mentions in the report that we're going to improve training, but I think all of us around here have been on compulsory training. You turn up, you tick the box, you walk out the door, and it's had no impact. And I'd like to know how you're going to monitor going forward that there has been a real impact in the change of attitude. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Christine. Very eloquent and heartfelt. Mr. Matthews. Oh, Lizzie.
Hand over if I may, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. So the attendance is one of our biggest challenges, I think, with sub-panels. So with the hate crime one specifically, that's made up of volunteers. So they aren't mandated to come like with our panel members, they are paid an allowance, obviously. So it's a bit easier to get them to attend when they're getting paid. But obviously with volunteers, it's purely who can attend and who's got the time to give to that. We've tried to change the timings of the meetings to make it more available so that people can come. So they're actually held 6 p.m. till 8 p.m. in the evenings to kind of adjust for work times and stuff. So we've tried that already. One of the things we had at so in the report it mentions we had an away day last week, and that was one of the key recommendations around attendance. We've put it to the panel members as to find out what are the barriers there really. So we're waiting to hear back from them to action that, but we can definitely bring an update back on what we're doing around that one. With the out of court resolution panel, again, that one, the last 2 times have had to be cancelled because we haven't met our quorum on that one. At our corporate governance board last week, the chief and the PCC have agreed to do a joint letter to all the partners to stress the importance of that panel, particularly because we've had some key findings from the cases we've already dip sampled. So that letter will be going out probably next week or in the next couple of weeks to partners to stress the importance of that one, and then we'll keep monitoring it and see where we go with that one. In terms of the hate crime sub-panel and the outcomes coming from that, we definitely appreciate that there's a kind of a wider review of LGBT plus hate crimes that needs to take place, and that's one of the recommendations from this annual report. So that was something that we'll pick up in action throughout the next year. I think another important thing to note is just the volume that we've looked at. So in each of these sub-panels, we dip sample quite forensically a number of cases. One of the things that came out of last week and one of our recommendations from our kind of review report we did was around making sure that is a statistically significant sample size enough to make a statement on. Whilst that's an action that we are taking forward, it's making sure that whilst if you look at the numbers, we've reviewed 5 hate crime cases over the year. So is it enough to make that statement around kind of a certain action? So we're looking at how we can increase those numbers, either putting on more panels or getting more volunteers involved to make sure that we are looking at a proportionate sample size. We also had some training last week around root cause analysis and making sure the questions that we're asking of the force get to that root cause as to what the issues are. So that's something that we're putting into place for that. So hopefully next time we can bring back an update as to what we've done around that. With the sub-panels, obviously where there's been learning identified, or if a outcome has not been appropriate or it's inconsistent, that individual learning goes directly back to the officers to feed, or it goes back to the sergeants to feed back to the officers or inspectors. And that's followed up then back through the next panel. So that individual learning is happening on a kind of case-by-case basis. One thing that we are trying to get better at is elevating that up to the panel, the board kind of level-wise in terms of strategic, what our strategic questions are, drawing themes across those different sub-panels.
Happy, Christine?
Thank you. Yes, it all sounds very good. I noticed I think it's the second recommendation is that there should be a thorough audit conducted, and I think that would be very useful to have some feedback on. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Lizzie. I couldn't comment on statistical population and relevance because you know where I live with this one. I mean, 5 on the face of it's not enough. But you know, you've got the data, you've got the numbers. Let's make it relevant. So thank you very much, panel. Any further questions? Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. And I have a thing about silo working, especially about panels, sub-panels, strategic panels, sub-panels from the strategic panels. I challenge it at my own council where they work in silos, and I say, well, why is that? I'm getting a report from that, and it should be, it's part of this and that. And I don't know whether they can grasp the idea of bringing it together and putting it under one section. And I look at this and I cringe with the fact that many panels. And I don't know whether some new panels in my kitchen, I could fill it out with them all. And I may have some value, but when you look at, well, I always want to do an audit of it all. Because you mentioned the hate crime, and then there's an hate crime sub-panel, and you mentioned panels. So there's a panels coming from all of these, which, gosh, what usually happens is is the subject of each one, and does it cross over into somebody else's? And this is where sometimes things fall between two stools, and you say, well, that's not my job, that's theirs. And that should have been brought up there. Could be some strategic thinking about looking at all of them. Firstly, do you want sub-panels? What is the 8 crime main panel's job in the first place? Should it not be dealing with it per se, rather than saying having a sub-panel? You might have perhaps a working party to deliver something like we do here. Perhaps that's fine, but that's a one-off, and then you deal with it, and that's it. But then, of course, you then talk about attendance. Volunteers attend, they don't get paid, and they're working and everything else. So you then wasted money and having to cancel ones because you're not quorate. So there's a saving there somewhere. If we could look at the old strategic points and say, and it has to be audited, it may not, so I accept that. But surely somebody, some outside, be looking at all those panels and saying, what's the value of them? What's its strategic role, and what are the outcomes it's trying to do? Because at the moment, I'm not quite sure what they are and the value of them. That's me. Probably something is happening, but I can't see it at the moment, and I need to be convinced. I sit on the 8 crime panel with the police when it first started, and there were members from all the districts sat on it, and it was quite a good learning curve. They did some case studies, and then you can comment about whether it was or whether it wasn't, and then the outcome was given by a judge in it. So it was quite useful. And I was going to suggest perhaps maybe if any members would like to join it, not join it per se, but to come and see and see how it all works, because I think it's quite interesting. I think members get something from it. So, the Chairman, through evaluation of all of them, I think needs to be systematically scrutinised, micromanaged in a way that says, are we getting what we want? And how do you get members of the public to come? Is it interesting enough for them to come and join it, or is it something they sit through it and think, I'm not coming again? I just share that with you. So
thank you, Mr. Lloydell. You always demonstrate an exceptional knowledge and experiential life to do with the police in particular, and that arena. I'm guessing it's not finance, so it must be one of the other 3 that wants to come back on that one.
I have that pleasure. So I completely appreciate what kind of the councillor is saying around the lack of communication between panels and making sure that that those loops of feedback are there. One thing that we are working on with the force and through this review is that we are developing a joint scrutiny framework. So at the moment there are lots of scrutiny panels or little audit groups that are set up across the force to kind of dip sample cases and look in greater detail around kind of how a victim has been treated, or a kind of a certain crime type, for example. So we've built a framework that joins all of that work across the 2 different organisations as to what that looks like. For us at the moment, the 4 sub panels we have is on page 50. So we've just got those 4 at the moment. However, one thing that has come out is that there's a need for other ones. So it's how do we do all of it? So one of the things that we're looking at the moment with the force is setting up a public treatment panel. So this one won't have a specific focus like hate crime, although the proposals would still keep that one separate because it's so important, because some of the findings have been so concerning. But with this public treatment one, we could stand up and stand down based on emerging issues, local issues, or on a kind of national priority. So if there is a national thing, a national priority around rape, we could stand this panel up to look at rape cases. If it's something around reporting online through the online form, we could stand it up and we could do a bit of a dip sample on that. So it's kind of more agile and flexible as to what we need. So hopefully we'll reduce some of those need for all of these different panels all the time. So that's one of the things that we're exploring at the moment. We've also through this process had a bit of a challenge as to what constitutes a scrutiny panel and what is effectively an audit. So there are lots of pockets across the force of where audits are being done of cases of crime records, but there isn't that independency from a member of the public or a volunteer, and it's managing what we're trying to achieve from some of these scrutiny panels. Is it that we have that public oversight of it, which is what we'd want from it? Is it that the police force actually get a greater insight as to what the public expectation is? Because equally it's just as beneficial for them as it is for the public to know what the public are expecting. So that's one of the conversation we've had around, is it truly an independent audit if you're reviewing your own cases and finding your own outcomes without any kind of public oversight? We also have started to look at how our audit panels, we've got 2 boards, the JARAP, which I think the annual reports come into the next Policing Crime Panel meeting, and our ethics. So there are 2 boards, and we're looking at developing joint protocols to how they work together. So how the audit committee would identify an organisational risk in a certain area and then communicate that with our ethics, who could then give that assurance at a deeper level through dip samples or kind of further scrutiny. And we also have got an internal audit scheduled for next year around all of our scrutiny panels. So we have got that independent party coming in to review all of our work around scrutiny and kind of give an independent assessment as to what we look like. But it is a kind of a evolving beast, and especially in the national kind of landscape as it is, where there's more and more stuff in the public domain and more stuff going wrong with policing. It's kind of an area of focus, and it will continue to be just as important as it ever was. So how we manage that demand.
Okay, thank you, Lizzie. And I think again for members of the public, you know, we collectively will know securing volunteer support is probably becoming more and more difficult, and yet actually wherever those volunteers are invited, they actually play a critical role in how society moves forward. So yeah, if there's any volunteers out there, please put your hand up. And your hand up, Lizzie. Yeah.
Like, if I could just say one further thing, just touch on that point really. So we are immensely grateful for the volunteers that come. We've got some that have served 24 years and asked kind of some of our scrutiny panels. So we don't have any problem with people staying once we get them. It's just advertising that and making sure we've got a diverse view and different perspectives on our scrutiny panels. One of the things that we want to improve over the next year is around how we make the public aware of the scrutiny work that goes on, because from a public perspective it's so crucial and so important, but it's how we get the voice of our panels out there more to know that that's a forum for the public to tap into as well. So it's one of the things we discussed last week around having a regular newsletter just from our scrutiny panels, more of a social media presence, so people can find out that there is either that assurance happening or it's not, and it's something to be concerned about. So that's something we're looking to focus on.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, Lizzie, and I think your comment about long-standing volunteers is actually really relevant, because we collectively will also know the more time you spend in and around the governmental mechanism, whether it's local government or your department or whatever it is, actually the more you understand and learn about how we actually do serve society and what our role in society is. So if there are any volunteers out there, get in touch with Lizzie. Okay, any other questions on this agenda item for the panel? Liz?
More of a point really than a question. I totally commend you on managing to keep volunteers for 25 years. I've worked in various voluntary sectors, and anything over 5 years is certainly an achievement. So well done on that. The point I always make is that volunteers are not paid not because they're worthless, but because they're priceless, and they have to feel priceless. You know, they have to be listened to, and there to be a recognition that they're listened to as well. And if we can do that by ascertaining various different things or by it going through social media, I'm sure that would be valued by them.
Just to follow up on that, we have, I completely agree, I couldn't stress it enough. We have an annual celebration event for all of our volunteers, where we bring them all into Forsyth quarters to get a lovely meal. We've got long service awards that we present. So that's something that we've only had the last couple of years. So we've got a pin for 10 years and a kind of a plaque for 24 plus. So we do try and make them feel as valued as possible. And they've kind of got my personal contact details. They've also got our chief exec's contact details. So they do feel like they can go into any level of the organisation and raise concerns if they do have them. So.
Okay, and we complete on this agenda item. Everybody happy? Thank you. Is everybody happy to note the report? Report be noted. Thank you, everybody. Okay, agenda item 9 is the annual report on complaints against the Police and Crime Commission. And may I invite Lauren Haslam, Director of Law and Governance, to talk us through, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. Short report, hopefully routine. You've probably seen these for the last couple of years. I'm just required to report to the panel on an annual basis on the sort of headline data, if you like, in relation to complaints over the previous 12 months, which I have done at paragraph 6 of the report, set out in brief the details of the complaints received. And you'll see that the majority of the complaints that come into my office expressed to be about the Police and Crime Commissioner are actually really service complaints, and they're redirected onto the relevant service point. And I work closely with Claire, who's always been very helpful in helping to manage those complaints through the process. You'll see, Chair, it's a bit of a hybrid situation in relation to complaints management, in that the objective of the exercise is to achieve an informal resolution. There's no power to undertake an investigation, so it's really a matter of kind of engaging with the complainant and engaging with the PCC when a complaint is received and trying to find a way forward. So the status of the complaints is set out, as I say, at paragraph 6. I don't think there's anything else I can really say on it there, and so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. So it's principally a statement of fact. Are there any questions, or happy to just note the report from Lauren? Everybody happy? Okay, thank you, Lauren. The report's noted. Okay, agenda item 10 then is the appointed of co-opted independent members, and on the basis we actually have one in the room. Parisha, could we just ask you to exit for a couple of minutes, and we'll come and get you when we've done. Thank you, Parisha. Okay, Damien, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to outline the options for the recruitment of co-opted independent members of the Police and Crime Panel. So to provide a bit of context, Police and Crime Panels are required to appoint a minimum of 2 independent co-opted members as part of their membership. So the Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland panel was set up with a total of 15 members comprising of 13 elected members and 2 co-opted members. In February 2022, following a recruitment exercise, the 2 existing panel members, Parisha Chavda and Salma Manzoor, were appointed. Their current term of office actually comes to an end in February 2026. Independent member Salma Manzoor has expressed that she does not wish to apply to extend her current term of office. A recruitment process will therefore need to be undertaken to recruit a new co-optee to fill this vacancy. I can confirm, following discussion with Parisha prior to the meeting, that she wishes to continue to serve as one of the panel's 2 co-opted members if the panel are in agreement. It's worth noting that the appointments are technically for a 4-year term. However, the government has announced its intention to abolish police and crime commissioners, and whilst the impact is not yet clear on police and crime panels in terms of any future governance, it's likely that the position will be until May 2028. So the panel has 2 options with regards to the co-opted position, the 2 co-opted positions. So the first option is to elect to allow Parisha Chavda to continue to serve as one of the panel's 2 co-opted members without carrying out a further recruitment process for that 1 vacancy, so extending her term for the 4 years or until 2028, or to go out to seek 2 new co-opted independent members. So as part of the process, the Local Government Association recommends that interviewing and selection of independent co-optees may be delegated to a selection panel or sub-panel. So convention for this panel is that comprises of 3 panel members, usually comprising of the chair and vice chair. Just to note that prior to the meeting, Parisha, the current independent member, expressed her wish to be part of that process as well as an independent member. So in terms of recommendations, the Police and Crime Panel are asked to consider whether it wishes to extend the term of office of Parisha Chavda for the next 4 years without carrying out a recruitment exercise for that vacancy, subject to any abolition of police and crime panels, or whether it wishes to undertake a recruitment exercise for 2 new co-optee members. And second recommendation is to appoint a subcommittee of 3 police and crime panel members to shortlist and interview candidates. And there's a time scale for the recruitment exercise covered in the report as well.
Thank you, Damien. I'm certainly very happy to propose both of those recommendations. So one, Parisha's term of office is extended, and then the second part is that we go out to consult recruitment for the second independent member. And do we have a seconder?
Happy to second that, Chair.
Any other observations, comments from members? Oh, Liz.
Could the panel express its thanks to Salma for her service on this panel?
Duly noted, and we will. Thank you, Liz. Any other comments, observations? Got to agree sub-panel. Now, on the basis that Liz and I sit on it by default, Parisha has offered, but she is the independent member as it sits. Does anybody else want to put their hand up and step forward? Christine. Perfect. I think that's probably, it's an interesting one because I think Parisha has her own insight being the volunteer, an independent member. So just an observer. Yeah.
She could attend but not be a member of the panel making a decision. She's not a voting member, if you would find it helpful.
Christine.
If Parisha is allowed to be on the panel, then I'm happy to not be on the panel. I wasn't sure of her position.
Okay, so as it stands then, it will be made up of Liz, Vice Chair, myself as Chair, and Parisha as the independent member on that selection panel. Everybody happy? All in favour? Excellent. Thank you very much, members. You want to bring the Parisha back, or should we just let her know on the way out? You want to bring Parisha back? Thank you, Lauren. Okay, so that's all done. Thank you, members. That leaves us with agenda item 11, which is the date of the next meeting, which is now currently scheduled to take place on the 4th of February 2026. Agenda item 12 is any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent. Merry Christmas. It is indeed that time of year. It is scary. Who stole 2025? I've got absolutely no idea, but safe travels home. Everybody have a great Christmas, and we'll see you all in the new year. Thank you very much. And the meeting closes at 15:37.